Welcome, John, to the Scottish Jazz Archive, and thanks for making time for us today. I wondered if we could start by or if I could start by asking you how you first got into jazz.
No comment. Oh, sorry, that's tomorrow. Wrong interview. Yes, as you know about me, we've known each other for 40 years. And so I grew up surrounded by the few great records my mum had. And I've often wondered if I realised they were even jazz. It was just that was the music that she played and was around the house. And Fats Waller, Bix Beiderbecke, Muggsy Spanier, Louis Armstrong, of course. And the reason I mentioned she only had a few records was that it wasn't like today. Not to skip wildly ahead, but it was just this excellent small collection, all of which I still play them today. I played one of them this morning before I came here. So I don't know when I realised that I really liked jazz, but I went to get my hair cut when I was 12 or 13. And the chap was playing Johnny Hodges, which is unusual anywhere, isn't it? And I was getting my hair cut, and I said, "Oh, I really like Johnny Hodges. That's great. You don't hear him." And he was completely and utterly taken aback that this little squirt knew it was. How did you know it was Johnny Hodges? And I didn't know how to answer that. Well, it's Johnny Hodges. So he went and he put a different record on. That's how long ago it was. It was records, and it was Coleman Hawkins, I remember. I've never had a huge affection for one of the great tenor players, obviously, but not my personal favourite. I said, "Oh, Coleman Hawkins." So at this point, this guy just completely freaked, and he phoned my mum and said, "You should get this kid a saxophone. This guy's got an ear." And of course, I didn't. I just heard these people. So for a few years, figured, at some point I'll get something. I wanted to play the trumpet. But at school, they weren't handing out no instruments unless you played in the orchestra. They're not interested in that. And got deeper and deeper into the pre-war jazz, if anybody's interested, really. Completely issued all the bebop onwards. No, this was a complete waste of time. They had taken the wrong turning on their journeys. Yes, quite a hard line right through my teens. And eventually, when I was 17, I got some money and I bought a saxophone. People just said, "Well, you can't learn the trumpet unless you start really young." I didn't ever want to play the saxophone. I still don't, to be perfectly honest. But it's a very easy instrument. It's the easiest of all the instruments that you would get in a jazz ensemble. Very, very simple. And so I kind of took to it. But, any drunken circus chimp could play the saxophone. So, that was the story. So I don't know when I got into jazz. It was just always there and always part of my life. The first record I bought was actually a saxophone record, Ben Webster, Midnight at the Montmartre. But the second one was Ruby Braff, Bugle Call Rag. I remember that.
I remember when I first met you, and I'm trying to remember how old we were then. We were probably late teens, weren't we?
17, 18.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember thinking of you as quite a modern player.
Well, yes, that's the odd thing, isn't it? And so I grew up with jazz. So I refused to qualify or whatever the kind of jazz that is jazz. People use words like traddy and trad and all this kind of stuff. That's jazz. Everything else is some other kind of jazz. Bebop, modern jazz, Latin jazz, cool jazz, modal jazz, jazz fusion, all of which I've come to love. I mean, I a ridiculous amount of records in the house, and there are shelves of all that stuff. So, and you ask somebody who isn't a jazz fan, to identify jazz, they know what Louis Armstrong or somebody, that's jazz to them. Whereas if you were to put on something like a John Abercrombie record, an immense, huge fan of, they would struggle to, So that my point is that when I refer to jazz, what I mean is everything up to bebop, really. Uh, and I don't know. I mean, it's
Yeah, because it's interesting looking at your career from the outside. It's almost like you started
well,
quite modern and
coming to the playing of music. I don't know. I suppose I'm tempering what I say because the traditional, so the jazz that I liked scene was completely closed to young players, and most of the ones in Edinburgh now passed away, and would deny that. But you couldn't even sit in with them. They were just not interested, and that's remained to. Again, a lot of them are dead now, but it remained up to the end of their lives that they just didn't want me anywhere near them because I earned a living playing music and always did. You know, I mean, when we met, we were just coming out of school. I think I was at college, finishing up my hires and everything, and I didn't ever get a straight job. I managed to always make rent, you know, playing, and that the purists of that scene, particularly in Scotland, just did not want to know. Now, Forrie Cairns, the great clarinet player, Forrie Cairns, will tell you exactly the same story. And he's one of the true giants of Scottish jazz clarinet. That they, you know, if you earned your living, because of the people they liked were the guys that stayed in New Orleans, worked day jobs, and played for extra money, you know, at nights or the weekends. And that was real jazz. And the guys that drifted up to Chicago, New York, places like that, they were just, you know, mercenaries and all that kind of thing. Forgetting that that included Louis Armstrong and Johnny Dodds and Kid Ory and Edmund Hall. Anyway, long story short, I fled to London. I couldn't really play. I'd only been playing maybe a year or something. Couldn't play at all. And just sort of split the scene. Always loved London, loved the idea of London. My mum had taken us down there 2 or 3 times for weekends, loved it. And all the stories I'd heard growing up about these terrific bands, you know, and everything, and the revival time in the 50s. I thought, I'll go there and learn how to do this. And expected there to be that scene there. And because I was playing the tenor saxophone, in Scotland, the preeminent guys were Phil Bancroft, who is still my favourite. Certainly, actually, I was going to say Scottish. He's one of my favourite tenor players anywhere. I heard him 6 months ago or something. I mean, you know, I just, wherever they come from, Phil is one of my favourite. And, you know, Tommy Smith and a couple of other guys. So they were writing tunes. I tried writing tunes and, you know, to try and be accepted and tried to play that more modern way. And, you know, for good or for bad, right at the time I was going to London, not able to play, Joe Henderson brought out those State of the Tenor albums. It's like, wow. And I had no concept at the time how difficult this was to play, you know, those records, right? And so I thought, oh, that's what I'll do. I'll get a bass player and a drummer, which I did in London. And I'll play quietly and I'll play beautifully. And it's like, and 40 years later, still nowhere near it. I got to study with Joe in San Francisco in the 90s, and he was horrified, I have to say. We'll maybe come to that later. You know, famous musicians have been horrified at my playing. But and Michael Brecker brought that record out in '87, you know, and that's the way everyone was playing. And it's still one of the best records I've ever heard. So, okay, you know, my obsession is pre-war jazz, but, you know that record, right? Kenny Kirkland and that thing. So, so that's the way everyone was playing in London. And I wasn't, you know, and I still was. The guys I'd liked were, if you remember in the 80s, Buddy Tate was always at the festival, right? Errol Warren, those guys. Arnott Cobb, I don't think came, but I was obsessed with Arnott Cobb, Eddie Lockjaw Davis, the big-toned Texas tenor players. So I was doing this, and of course, I didn't realise it, but people just thought, who is this guy? You know, this is just... And I remember going to a rehearsal with guys who'd become dear friends. We were in a couple of bands together and all that kind of stuff. And one of them had heard an Arnott Cobb record, which probably today, I mean, with all your students, there's probably none of them have ever heard of Arnott Cobb, right? So, and then it was just no different. He was not known. So they'd heard this, and it was exactly what I was trying to do. And they came in saying, now we get it. It's not that you're terrible, it's that you're trying to play this, you know, basic, you know, full-toned, nothing clever about Arnott Cobb, but still fantastic, wonderful. So anyway, so that was it. And yes, I was trying to be a modern player to try and fit and trying to find a way to get through it all. I knew I wanted to do it. It's just it was the wrong instrument, the wrong time, the wrong city, all that kind of stuff. But and when you ask people, you're doing a series of these, and you ask them about influences. I remember the great Alex Welsh, who's a hero of mine, was asked about his influences, and of course everybody thinks it's Bixby, de Beck, and all the rest of it, and Louis. And his biggest influence, because he was a great singer, was Al Jolson. And when you hear that, you hear it in Alex playing in his everything about it. It's Al Jolson. And my mum, she was engaged to Alec when in the 50s, would say, yes, that's him and Alec and his dad would sing those tunes, Mother would play the piano. And that was his influence. And I've always contested, and I put it to, much better musicians than me that have accomplished a lot more. And they laugh at first. But if you discuss it with them, they realise that, there's more than a grain of truth in it. But the biggest influence, certainly on me, is money. And I've seen a number of musicians become the player that richer people wanted them to become. You take the likes of Nigel Hitchcock's one of the greatest tenor players of his generation, again, worldwide, never mind England, Britain, Europe. Nigel Hitchcock is just sensational. And you got a series of very high-profile jobs, the whole thing, George Michael and Dire Straits and all that kind of stuff, doing that. And nobody ever paid him just to be an absolutely fantastic Brecker-style tenor player. He would do that. You would hear him in pubs in London doing that. But so he became that player, that session guy par excellence. And I became this I joined a soul band. My first proper gig was your sort of 60s soul band touring around Europe. And when people find out you can do that, the older musicians, Luddy Sams was the guy that had this band. He used to sing backup for James Brown. It was all very exciting. And he had come to London. It seems to have a series of babies with a series of different women, but that he also had this soul band. And the younger musicians in it they were used to hearing that Brecker Bob Berg thing. And then Luddy had me in. And of course, I love that 60s soul stuff. And the way I played, simple, straight ahead, that's exactly what he wanted. And he couldn't quite understand that they were, I don't want that jazz playing. And he liked what I did and all that kind of stuff. And because the rock and roll thing was just as important to me certainly by that time, as the jazz thing. And I know that's the case with you and with a lot of great musicians. I'm always very suspicious of jazz musicians who only listen to jazz. I think, wow, it's like a Man United supporter, and you get talking to some of them, and they don't know anything about any other club. All they know about is Man United. So what the hell do you know about football? And I think it's the same with jazz, and the nature of the music. It needs to leak things in, as your music has. Mine hasn't, but if you're not getting out and finding out what's out there, even if you don't like it, I'm always a bit suspicious of that. So. Anyway, sorry, I'm rambling.
So you were touring Europe, and were you still based in London at that point?
Right off the bat, I got. That was the weird thing. That Scotland's the only place I've sort of failed. Really, it's obviously when you asked me to do this, I started thinking about this disastrous life, and I realised, I played my card. I would play them the same again, and it just didn't work out. But I'd lived in London for many years, and then I went to Boston to school, late, realising I'd kind of hit a brick wall, and needed some. So I went to Berkeley, and then I went to San Francisco and LA and all that, and up to Seattle, and ended up coming backwards and forwards to Vancouver in Western Canada. And in those places, I was a sort of a jazz saxophone clarinet player that got hired. But here I was still that 18-year-old kid who couldn't play. But yes, so when I got to London, right off the bat, I moved in the February, and in the April, myself and a bass player, a Welsh bass player who lives in Washington, D.C. now, Max, we got this gig 4 nights a week at a restaurant in Greek Street, just 1 block over from Ronnie's. And the guy went to put on jazz to get people in before they went to Ronnie's. And we didn't tell him, and nobody else did, that Ronnie's do food, right? So he thought people would come and eat, and then, and it was months before he realised that this was not working. But it meant, I had this gig playing jazz saxophone, and so got kind of wandered away from playing, that horrible term Dixieland, which is racist overtones and everything. And I was never a New Orleans guy, so. But I couldn't find my way into that scene at all. There were either very established bands that had been together for decades, or absolutely terrible pub bands that were playing for drinks. And I wanted to earn a living. I thought that was part of, right or wrong, I thought that's what you did because of what I'd heard growing up. You went on the road, you made money playing music. Probably a fantasy for somebody that wasn't particularly good. Anyway, so I got that gig, and then, this sounds like it's I do look back over things and think that I don't believe a word of this. And I looked at my box of photos, and I thought, I'm nothing to substantiate that X, Y, Z happened. But I got called for a gig, and for the second time in my life, because it happened in Scotland, I was playing in a pop band. And I got into that because the saxophone player killed himself. And this happened again in London, in Luddy, and it was Luddy's band. And they had this gig on the Saturday, can you do this gig? And some of these guys in this band were the ones that, the Arnott Cobb guys, It's like, now we realise. So I went to this gig, and it was for the Rothschilds had this coming out party for 2 21-year-old twins. And it was the full. Mick Jagger was there, came in this old beautiful battered sports car. He was married to Jerry Hall. She came in the helicopter. It was all that kind of stuff, We got a huge sum of money. Even today it would be considered, we got £350 each to play 2 sets, even today that would be considered a lot of money, Then my rent was £30 a week then. So after it, Luddy said, right, well, we're leaving for, Holland, Belgium, whatever, in a week, we're rehearsing, do you want the gigs? And that was it. So, and that was like 6 months after I'd moved down, and off we went, and that was great, and I was starting to learn how to play and how to do gigs, and, intonation and all that kind of stuff, how to behave, and, on the road, there's a whole thing you got to learn. That stood me in great stead. I played with that band for a couple of years. So that's it. So
and what happened after that then, John? Did you come back up the road?
No. So that was 86 or something. I think I moved to London, and I lived there. I moved out to Oxford, met a girl. Moved out to Oxford for a couple of years. It's lovely, fantastic. And then I realised I had to, do something about my playing. It really was. I was practicing a lot, and it's just getting worse and worse. And my mum came across this advert for, and of course Tommy Smith had been to Berkeley, and he said, you could send an audition tape. Yeah, so I did, and they cut the fees down and all this kind of stuff. And my mum took out a loan, and I went and did that for a couple of semesters, which was amazing. It was incredible. Amazing. Being around people that want to play all the time and want to play jazz. Because I was playing, that's why I was saying about the money thing. I was playing a lot of, commercial things and soul, blues, that kind of thing. Once people know you can do that, you can do the big explosive solo. Get that guy, and which I've always liked ballads. That's what I like most. This happened to Paul Gonsalves because I'm obviously on that level, but on the exalted level of Paul Gonsalves, he was the preeminent ballad player. But because of that, is it 1956? Diminuendo and crescendo in blue, the blues. That's it. That's what he's known for, and that's what they had him do every night. But he is just the most incredible ballads player. I digress.
Well, no, I think you make a really good point there that you get you get lumbered with how people recognise you, and then you're not really allowed to do anything other than that.
People are very suspicious. I mean, again, I have no way of substantiating this, but I was at a festival in Windsor, another nice place, and the guy who ran the festival said, "Lowell Coxhill's looking for you. Do you know Lowell?" And I said, "Oh yeah." I said, "I don't know Lowell." He said, "He's looking for you. He wants to talk to you." I thought, "Oh dear, oh dear." And a couple of minutes later, there's the, the little glasses and the bald head, Mr. Coxill. He said, "Oh yeah, John Burgess, I want to talk to you." And he said, it was getting, at the time, they still, you magazines like City Limits and Time Out and these jazz magazines, they would print things about players, and he had been hearing people criticising me for doing all these different things, and I would I'd end up playing with Dudu Pakwana and Mervyn Africa, doing some African things, and I'd ended up playing some completely experimental stuff and and rock things, reasonably high profile kind of things, and also the New Orleans style jazz. And as you say, some sort of modern things. And he was just saying he had always suffered from people not taking him seriously and not valuing him, because obviously he played with the Damned, and he would go and sit in with Chris Barber, and he would do this and he would do that and do the next thing. And he said, "Just ignore it, just do it." And that whole discussion, I'm sure everybody else who's sat here has talked about. There's good music and bad music, right? Right. And that's my thing. Is that people say, "I don't like pop music." So you don't like the Beatles? What is it about the Beatles you don't like? It's an inane thing to say, right? And there's good music and bad music. So that was really nice. I mean, it's not that I kind of, oh yeah, I must forge my. I didn't realize at the time people were being quite so nasty, and it just seemed obvious to me that you just did when the phone rang. We were talking about that earlier, weren't we? When people used to phone you up, if the money was right, you went and did it. And if they thought you could do it, you're an artist after. You write beautiful melodies, you create fantastic albums. I'm a craftsman. And not a particularly good one, but a versatile one. And I can turn my hand to lots of different things. And I like that, That's why I play a lot of different instruments. And I like a lot of different kinds of music. And I'm kind of horrified that, oh God, kids today. I mean, I'm getting old, as you can see. It's the winter plumage now. But I do worry about the generation that's coming out that have no concept of any of the things I'm rambling on about. The earlier musics, the other kinds of music. They're come up as finished concert artists playing their own music that they have written, and have no way of. You'll meet them, and I'm not going to name any of them. They're all fantastic musicians, way, way, way better than I could ever hope to be. But you'll meet them, coming in and out of a festival or going to, it's like, But there's no way we can play together. They don't know any tunes, and that was always the thing, is that you could meet wherever I went in the world. Been lucky enough to live in lots of really great places. You can just turn up. There'll be a jam session, and somebody will call a tune and you play it. And I don't see that there is that now. It is very much you emerge. This maybe started when we were kids, that people were emerging at 18 and they were Queen's Hall ready, as it were, which suits promoters. It's like they don't have to spend any money developing them. They don't have to spend any money bringing them in from elsewhere. Here's somebody that we can just put up there. And I've never wanted, I like, which is fortunate because it's all I ever playing. I like pubs and clubs playing there, down in the trenches. So I'm certainly not complaining. I just worry that they're not going through that. Is there going to be the weight behind their playing once because you know what it's like. The light shines on them. They get their bit. The next bit is the hard bit. Anyone can be the flavour of the month when you're got to hear this new 19-year-old tabla player, guitar player, flute player, whatever. And then when it moves on, there has to be something there to keep you moving, And so I worry about that. I don't worry, it doesn't keep me up at night, I mean, concerned possibly is closer to the.
It's really interesting when you think about that. I mean, I share your concern and your worry, but when you think about what we were talking about earlier about finding it difficult to get access to the older generation of musicians because they saw you as something other because you were making money out of it. Because that's very much the experience of doing these interviews. That older generation, they weren't professional in that sense. I mean, they considered themselves professional in stature, but it didn't mean that they earned their money from jazz.
Interesting.
Many of them said, "Oh, I could only do it because my wife worked, or because I had a proper job, a 9-to-5 job." And it was, I think, only really our generation that started thinking, "Oh well, that we could make a living out of this." I don't know who told us that, but we seem to believe that.
It just seemed to be possible. I mean, I don't think it is now. The mismanagement of the country, certainly for the last 15 years, has meant that you can't do. I mean, when I went to during the war, but when I went to London, you could sign on, and you find your feet and all the rest of it. And so for a couple of years, you've got that income, rent paid, and you find your feet, and then off you go. And since then, if I've been in the country, I've been paying taxes and all the rest of it. But you get that period where you can do it, and that doesn't exist anymore. So, I can imagine people just, your kid says, "Well, I'm just going to go to London and I'm going to be a saxophone player." How would you do it? Rents, everybody's telling everyone else horror stories about rents, and they're all true. That wasn't the case then. I got a place for, as I say, 30 quid a week, which even then, 1,000 years ago, wasn't much. It was less than a gig. So if you had a gig, 1 gig a week, you had, I don't see that route now. I met this a fantastic young saxophone player who annoyingly has moved back to Scotland, so I moved one rank further down. I was hoping if I could stay alive long enough, I would get into the top 10. But Helena Kay, just sensational player, just got everything, sound, ideas, all the rest of it, and a pleasant person. Because that's obviously held me back in Scotland as well. You could book Burgess, or you could just get Conrad, and you get the great playing and a nice guy. You don't have to put up with a miserable moaning on about everything. But so I met her in as the life on the road sort of thing. We were going to Skye, and her band was going to Perth, and we met. Just happened to run into each other in the car park of Kinross Services, and I said to her, I'd never met her before, and I said, I'm a huge fan, and that first record you made as a trio, and we're talking about those Joe Henderson records, and she loves those too. And I said, I don't mean to be, condescending, patronising, and if I was, I'm horrified. But I said, I don't know how you kids make it. I don't know how you can do it, because when I went down there were lots of gigs, there were places opening. The Jazz Cafe was just opened. I went in there to. Had a tape I'd made here and gave John Dabner, his name was, gave him a tape. And I said, this place is amazing. Pictures on the walls of jazz icons and a real piano and all this. And so we chatted away. I said, this is an amazing place. I'd love to play here. And he said, okay, do you want to do Wednesdays for the next month? He didn't even listen to the tape. He said, you're a nice guy. I need people to do it. Now, that doesn't happen anymore, right? And so Helena, said, yeah, I can't do anything unless I get, taxpayer-funded sponsorship, and that, of course, is a huge, great hole to walk into, because the year after, when you go back to these places, well, can we have a gig? And your fee is now your fee. There's no subsidy. Okay, it's actually a bit of an elephant trap. So, so hopefully she wasn't offended by this sort of old nobody saying, "Oh, I don't know how you kids can do it," but I really don't know, And that's it. She was living in New York, I think, and then London, and of course has moved back to Scotland now because you can just about afford to live here, which is great for the scene, unless you happen to be a struggling saxophone player looking for work. But yeah, there was a chance of doing it then, don't you think? And I never really taught much, but you could get a couple of students, and I was never precious about what I was playing. I wanted to play. Not that anyone would know, but the sort of Condon Alex Welsh style music, but there was no way into that, and I wasn't precious about that. I mean, I love just about anything, you know. It's just about anything. I love Johnny Cash, you know. It's the whole thing. Maynard Ferguson, don't like him. Anyway, sorry.
Perhaps to round off the interview, John, I wonder if you could reflect on some of the kind of highlights, I suppose, of your career. I mean, what are the things that are abiding memories? Why? Because you said earlier, very poignantly, that you'd play the cards the way you've played them again.
I would do it again, yeah. And it didn't work out, but yeah, I you know, if it was all wound back, I know I would just try this. I wanted to live in America, and I tried, and it just couldn't make it stick. Yeah, and I should have stuck with the kind of jazz I wanted to play, and maybe got a job, you know, some boring job. My mum always said, "You'd last a day, son. You couldn't ever have worked for somebody, you know." And I think anyone who knows me is like, "Yeah, right, yeah. I can just see you in middle management in the Scottish Widows, you know, telling everybody to, you know, no, you know." So, yeah, I kind of lost that whole kind of 15-year period when everyone else was getting busy creating their careers or whatever it is you do, going backwards and forwards to America and then Canada. You know, come back, you know, for 6 months, earn a pot of money, go back again. You know, when the money runs out, come back, sort of thing. And, you know, visas were always a problem. I never managed to do all that. And looking back, I was playing the wrong instruments, I suppose. And I started too late to ever really be any good. That whole thing I was talking about with, you know, the light shining on these young cats. Always thinking about people like Stan Getz, for example. Explosion in 60, 61 with the Bossa Nova thing, something like that. But he'd already been, you know, doing all the big bands and learning, you know, bebop thing, you know, all that kind of stuff for 15 years, you know. You know, all that's the Al Haig stuff and everything, and the Four Brothers stuff, and learning his trade, as it were. He was ready to be a star. And yeah, I just wonder about, you know, that whole thing, which I'm very grateful. It never happened to me. So, but highlights, highlights. Yeah, there must have been.
I mean, you know,
I did a tour with the Mavericks. I enjoyed that. That was great.
I mean, it doesn't. You know, it doesn't even have to be a musical highlight. And I think what I'm interested in, which we heard from another interviewee as well, was that they didn't choose jazz. Jazz chose them in a sense, but they were quite happy with that choice having been made.
Yeah. So I'm not sure that's true for me, because I've never really. I mean, I still struggle, you know, to come up with a coherent. The gigs I do now, thankfully, nobody listens. I just play in pubs in Leith, and you know, and quite literally nobody will be listening. And I still struggle with the basics of coming up with a cohesive, coherent solo, and it may be to do with the fact I'm trying not to just, you know, play a load of licks and just what'll work, you know, trying to play the way Keith Jarrett, who's another guy I was absolutely obsessed with at one point, and his whole idea of improvisation was not what everybody else was doing. And obviously saxophone players, guitar players can be bad for it too, as you learn a load of licks. That Brecker thing, you know, or the train robbers, you know, the generation before the train robbers, you get all that stuff down, you just keep regurgitating it. What Keith Jarrett would do is play a phrase. Jimi Hendrix is the same. Just play a phrase, and they're so incredibly musical that they, whatever beautiful thought, also beautiful thinkers as well, they would think of what should come next and be able to play it. So I'm not saying that that's where I'm operating, but that's what I'm trying to do, is you play a phrase, what should come next, because you know. And when you listen to somebody playing, so a fantastic piano player, played with quite a few times, I just made a couple of records with him 10 years ago or something, Tom Kincaid. And I just knew what he was going to play next, and it was always exactly right. And I couldn't get over to him just how exciting this was. It's like he just would deflect it. It's like, no, it's not just a series of, and you know what should come next. The way I'm speaking, there are pauses and whatnot, so in those pauses you'd be thinking about what comes next. So I'm trying to do that. That's maybe why my playing has kind of wandered off into this incoherent babbling, something like this lecture, because that's what this is. This will count towards your final grade. But yeah, highlights, no, I don't know. No, particularly the last bit of, no, it's spiralling down into nothing now. My race is run, it's over, done. I mean, for what it's worth, I'm selling my tenor. It's a very good one. Beautiful old Mark 6. So, I don't know where I go, what I'll do from here, but it will involve less and less playing. Unfortunately, there's nowhere to play, there's no money, and the phone doesn't ring. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to do this in another 40 years and find out, I could tell you all about house painting, garbage collection,